By way of introduction, I'll introduce Colleen in more detail, but remember last time, this may interest you, Colleen, actually. At the beginning, I defined what I thought was a master therapist. Yeah. I mean, when you heard that term, did you say, yeah, that's definitely me? Or did you say, what is he even thinking? What does he even consider a master's therapist?
The latter.
The latter, okay, all right. That's a humble thought. So anyway, I tried to define it because psychology is social science, at least how it's practiced in this department. And so I tried to operationalize the variables a little bit. So what I came up with was 3 criteria. So the first criteria was that a master therapist was a cognitive one, that they had a base of knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom. That's the cognitive one. And then on the emotional level, that they had compassion, empathy, a heart. And the third one was that they had built something, that they had manifested these skills in some kind of concrete way in the world over time. So that was my definition. But now I'm going to embarrass you with another definition, and that is that you can look at it in a more personal way, and that is to say that a master therapist is someone that a therapist would feel comfortable referring someone they know and care about to that person. And I think that's the highest compliment that you can pay to a therapist. And I feel that way about you. I feel that the way I've seen you operate as a therapist, I would always feel very comfortable in referring someone in terms of those characteristics and your professionalism. So anyway, welcome Colleen Kelly as our second master therapist. You can welcome her. I didn't cue them enough. All right. So as we talked about on the phone, that most of the people who are here are upper division, upper class psychology majors who are taking my introductory class in clinical psychology. And at the beginning of the class, many of them expressed at least an interest, a consideration. I'm told to talk a little bit louder. Oh, it's good? Okay.
Yeah.
At least considering the possibility of a career in mental health. And so they're very interested in the trajectories of the therapists. We've talked about the different licenses, we've talked about the licensing process, but tell us a little bit about how you came to be a therapist.
Well, I had a very long and winding path that brought me to becoming a therapist. I definitely did not start out interested in psychology. So,
what were you interested in initially?
Initially, I was really interested in the arts and dance, film, music. That was really what I was interested in.
Yeah.
I majored in general communication and minored in dance, and was very interested in film. And so those were my leanings in the beginning. Was more like on the art, from the artistic realm. So it took me a while before I kind of got where I am here.
Right. And what was it that made you veer off into from the arts to therapy?
Well, after I was in a rock and roll band, believe it or not. I was a drummer in a rock and roll band, and that was kind of a fun ride for a while. And then I worked in the fashion business and in public relations, and I came to the realization after being, working in those areas for a while. I also did some choreography. I choreographed some rock videos and that kind of thing. But I came to the realization that the business end of a creative field is pretty nuts. Like, it's pretty rough. And so it was a little disillusioning. I kind of got a little burnt out from that end of things. And then I kind of got, I think it was probably like in my early 30s, I got beset by this difficulty that I had with my hip that created a lot of pain, and a lot of limitations. So the things that I used as my outlet to kind of keep sane, working out and dancing and being creative, those were sort of very restricted. And so the things that I had always relied on to de-stress, to kind of that I felt like were taken away. And so I kind of went through a little bit of a dark night of the soul where I battled with some depression, and I became interested in the intersection between psychology and spirituality. So it was really kind of a meaning making for me, struggling and kind of letting go of what I was interested in before, and then came to psychology and I decided to go back to school.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I just have to say one thing. When you told me that you were a drummer, I don't think I ever told you, but of course we share that, music kind of background. And I had a psychological categorization of people in bands.
Did you really?
Yes, yes.
And where did I fall?
The drummer was always the most primal person.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, not very introspective at all, just sort of beating the drum. I mean, there are exceptions,
Fair
of course.
enough.
Phil Collins and Don Henley are both very intellectual, but usually the keyboardist, I found, was the most intellectual. The bass player is always the nicest because they keep everybody together.
But there's a few, Bill Bruford, he's really, really bright and really, he's got a lot of...
I guess they're obviously you're a living contradiction or to my typology here, but I thought it was interesting. The first time you told me, I was really shocked by that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you went into psychology, and when you first studied, what area of psychology were you drawn to? Were you always drawn to couples and families, or was it a general interest?
I didn't start out that way. I was really interested, like I said, in this intersection between spirituality and psychology. So I got very much interested in Jungian psychology, so dreams and sort of in-depth psychology in general, and then object relations, self-psychology. Those really made sense, and I think kind of my foundation of just feels so natural in who I am as a humanistic outlook. That kind of is in sync with my values of how I see the world. And then the others, like the object relations, was more complex ways to understand difficult situations, people that I felt were really helpful lenses.
Right, right. And then, so when you first started practicing, were you practicing more in terms of a dynamic humanistic hybrid? Mm-hmm. Was the humanistic spiritual aspect of it part of it too?
A little bit, yeah. But I found that I really was able to sort of, my interest was being at and adapting to whatever was going on in the person. So sometimes people didn't come in, they don't care a whit about spirituality, right? So I'm not going to start talking about spirituality, so it was about meeting them where they are, and that's something that always kind of came natural to me, just kind of connecting with them on a human level and trying to understand them. So I think in the beginning, it was the humanistic bent that helped me to connect, and then the depth psychology and the psychodynamic lens helped me to understand better. Right.
And at the time that you were studying more psychodynamic stuff, is that when you studied mentalization under the auspices of a dynamic training, or is that later?
No, that was much later. I was a fan of Fonagy, and some of his work, which I thought was really pretty brilliant. But I didn't get into mentalization until really I went to I started working at PCH. Mm-hmm. So that was about 5 years ago.
But you took a training. I think you cited that you did advanced training in mentalization.
Yeah, I did a number. Mm-hmm.
A number of those. So which came first, the interest in mentalization, or the stuff of Sue Johnson and the emotionally focused therapy?
The couples and the,
Oh, really?
yeah, the couples and family lens, that really, I started that right during my internship, so that.
Studying that, okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we should start with that, just go chronologically. What drew you to EFT? And who taught you?
Oh gosh, well, what drew me to it? Let's see. I mean, so many people that, I don't know how it is for you, Richard, but for me, so many people that come in have relationship issues. I mean, think about if you're going to go talk to somebody, how much of that is going to be about relationship trouble?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, what would be the percentage? I don't know, a lot.
100?
Right? I mean, if you think about it, like if you were having trouble, I mean, wouldn't that be a common denominator? So if people are coming in and they're talking about this trouble they're having with so-and-so, and I'm really upset with my mom or my boyfriend, this is what they did this week, and it's like you're talking about half of what you're talking about, or some part of it is not in the room. So you're hearing one person's perspective, and it felt like there was so much more opportunity for change to actually deal with the system dynamically, like right there, experientially in the room. And there was something kind of exciting about it too, because you're like, now you're in it with them. You're not just talking about this third person over here. It's really easy, I think, to think about what you do in hindsight when you're not in it, but when you're in the heat of it, and there's this person that you care about, that you're really, there's a lot of weight on this relationship, it's really loaded.
Yeah.
And so that's a very different kind of way of working, and so that really interested me.
Mm-hmm.
And the conceptualization, I mean, I was very wary at first when I got into it, and I kept kind of like, really? Like, I don't know that this is really going to work. And then slowly over time, both personally and also with my work, I started to see, wow, there's really something to this. It really can be effective.
When was the first time, and what context did you learn about EFT? Were you just reading about couples and you came across this, or did someone introduce it to you?
I was at a group psychotherapy training, and there was another, she's a colleague of mine, Dr. Karen Shore, and I was really impressed with her training and her background, and we had lunch together, and she was really taken with this new approach, and she had done a lot of her own, she had been in this field for quite a while, and she was just like, wow, this is something that I'm really taken with, and so I thought, oh, I'm going to check it out, and that's how I got interested.
So the students in the class have read and also read an overview article on the approach, and then also have seen a video of Sue Johnson talking about that you provided. But there are some people here who are not in the class, so could you briefly describe how you would explain EFT in a brief way?
So really the fundamental sort of undergirding of EFT is all based on attachment. So it's this idea that we grow and develop in the context of a relationship, and we have this basic underlying human need for connection. And it really takes, once you sort of understand this language of attachment and these sort of primal kind of longings and needs that we all have, a lot of the distress in relationships starts to make sense. And so EFT is really a way of operationalizing change within the relationship that takes, that you look at the relationship kind of from the outside of what is happening here, what is the trouble, what's the difficulties, and then going inside and working in real time with the couple, dealing with these struggles that you're having and kind of externalizing kind of the problem, like, okay, this is what I'm seeing. Are you seeing it? Getting us all on the same page. Is that what you're seeing? Is that what you're seeing? And then you start to kind of widen the lens a little bit and start to try and kind of touch on the underlying kind of real issues that are at play, which are usually attachment driven. So much, like people come in with all different kinds of problems, but oftentimes the underlying issues are, can I count on you? Are you there for me? Do I matter to you? And am I valued by you? And usually this is somewhere in there. And so if you start to get to people to be in touch with, yeah, I'm so angry at you because you don't pay attention to me. Like that would be an example. And what happens when you don't pay attention to that person? Well,
so
it hurts,
Are you primed when you're following this process? Are you listening for those kinds of communications and expressions of those kinds of feelings and ready to move into that?
Yeah, and I think rather than thinking about it like as, oh, you're manipulating this, it's really that this is there all along, and that if you get lost in these, what I would call content tubes, you could be there forever, like for years, like lost in the content. And it's not that the content doesn't matter. Like I always join them on the content. Like I got to really understand why that content's important.
Right.
But then I'm going to look for those other sort of attachment injuries or attachment ruptures that are going on and get to some of the underlying attachment issues.
And when you make that plunge, because you're evaluating or commenting on the process and understanding it, but at some point you have to decide to go below the surface toward these deeper emotions. When you take that plunge, what kind of reaction do you have from the couple? Do they usually respond to that as something that they're aware of, or they're not conscious of it?
It's kind of like I have to go with what's in the room. So whatever is in the room is what I'm going to try and build and expand on. And if I'm building and expanding and they're not connecting to what I'm doing, then I'm like, I'm not tracking, and I've got to go back. I've got to go back and understand until we're together. We have to be together first, and then I've got to sort of make this move. But I use their language, which is why sometimes, which I didn't do in the beginning, and it's kind of, I actually have a pad in front of me that I'll get there. Like it's like a volcano when you lash out at me, or whatever they use, their symbolism or the way that they're looking at it or how it feels to them. I really try and use their words and to amplify it so they know that I'm understanding them. And it's just a matter of like, you have all these choice points of different roads. So it's like, I know that content too is going to lead us to the same place that got them into therapy. And so I'm going to use what they're talking about, but I'm going to just sort of, forge this other direction.
I'm interested in what it feels like in the room when you make the choice to go into those deeper layers of affect and attachment issues, that you're talking and getting their vocabulary and understanding the sort of topography of it that they're bringing in. But at some point, you're making a decision to talk about feelings of not being valued or cared about, some kind of rupture in the attachment sphere. And you have to go to that level, right, with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for some people it feels really overwhelming and exposing, and if that's the case, then I want to join with them and kind of make sure that, like, I'll back up a little sometimes. It depends on how they respond, but it's really like, it's kind of like the way Sue Johnson talks about it, it's almost like the dance is going on, the communication, you've got to listen to the music. Like if I'm not tuning into the music and kind of what's really going on here, then I'm not going to have any traction with them.
So some people might find it overwhelming, and do some people find to get to that level cathartic? You get there?
Oh, yeah, because it's like all of this pent-up sort of longing and frustration. I mean, we all want to feel valued and like we belong and that we're significant to the people nearest to us. And so when you don't feel that, it sucks. Right?
Yeah. So it seems like it's a mode of therapy that really requires a lot emotionally of the therapist.
Yeah, I find that. I mean, I don't know how other people work in, EFT. I mean, I think different people work differently, but that's really, I'm more wired that way, so it comes naturally, like kind of it's almost like I run their experience through my body. It's like I almost feel like I can almost channel their face, like if I'm talking about a case to someone and conferring, it's like I can almost feel what it feels like to be inside their experience. And so when I feel that, it's like they feel like I'm with them then, and
Right.
then I can there's a trust there. Oh, she knows how scary this is, or she knows how frustrating this is,
Yeah.
as opposed to just kind of standing back and kind of, having this kind of cool and, you know what I mean? You're in it with them.
That's exactly what I was observing, that I think that you're saying you're sort of wired like this naturally, but I think to do that approach, from what I saw, you need to be ready to go deeper.
Yeah.
And to enter the fray of these deeper kinds of emotions. And that I think some of the therapeutic approaches require less of the therapist affectively. Like they'll talk about the need to establish rapport, right, or a therapeutic alliance, which don't really capture the depth of the emotion that you're talking about and what seems to be required in this type of treatment.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think that's probably right, but I would have to be in those other, understand those other modalities better and actually, but I think that that's true, and I don't think it makes it better or worse. I think it's just a different way of working. But I think when it comes to people's primary relationships, isn't that isn't that driven by emotional kind of wants and needs? I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but does that resonate, or does somebody feel, I don't know, I mean, it'd be interesting to see if other people feel differently.
Yeah, no, I don't, I mean, I think we'd all agree with that. I'm just looking at it in terms of the different, almost categorizing the different types of treatment approaches in terms of the affective requirements on the therapist. And I do think that some of them, the therapist is more of a psychoeducational role, right, or a commenter, but in this particular approach, the therapist has to go into these, deeper relationships.
Yeah.
And be ready to do that. So how many clients can you see in your private practice doing emotion-focused therapy consecutively? How long can you stay in that? Or is that your natural place to be? Maybe that's just the way you are.
Well, I'm also quite introverted, so it's like that extroverting energy when you're with, you're on and you're thinking and I need breaks from that. I definitely need to refuel and have time alone. But I think that I know that some people can see 9 or 10, but I think I start topping out at around 7, 8, and that's because some of my sessions are usually they're 75 minutes long, and
really?
Yeah, because when I work with couples and families, I do 75-minute sessions typically.
So you do 7 75-minute sessions?
Not regularly, but I mean that's already that's a lot for me. Okay. So maybe I'll do 2 or 3 15-minute and then the rest 75-minute kind of thing.
Okay, all right. So how does the mentalization stuff, does it feel easily to integrate within the EFT framework, to combine that?
Yeah, and I don't sort of think of myself as I understand that how to work from an EFT perspective, but it's not like I feel like I'm kind of restrained by that. Okay. It's like I feel like whatever works, whatever gets you through the day, whatever works, I'm willing to utilize. And I think for me, mentalization is a really good fit. I like to, one of the ways I find it is being really helpful is as a diagnostic. Like what's when things aren't going well, or you feel like the session's kind of stuck, I can often understand it when I understand that mentalizing has broke down or mentalizing has gone offline.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, many of you might not know what mentalization is. Maybe could you give a brief explanation of mentalization? Is that
Brief.
Is that
Yeah.
or moderately brief or
Yeah.
long, whatever you would
Yeah. Well, gosh, mentalization is really, it's about the idea that what makes us human. What makes us human is that we all have thoughts, feelings, desires, ideas, drives, and I can't see all of those. Like, those are going on for you, Richard, but I can only see you nodding at me. I can't see all of that. But the idea is that your behavior is based off of what's going on inside. And so, like, let's say one of you got up and went, out and ran out of here in a huff, right? I don't know what's going on, but maybe you found this horrific, or maybe you suddenly had to go to the bathroom or something. I don't know. So the idea would be one way that would be a non-mentalizing perception is, oh, she must have really hated this. But do I know that? No, I don't know that. So it's kind of this idea that we've got all of these, that behavior is driven by these different internal states of mind.
And bringing those to language too.
Right. To be able to articulate that. So it's like I have stuff that's going on inside, and I can see, so it's sort of me reflecting on maybe, oh, I feel a little nervous now. So that would be me mentalizing myself. Or if you look maybe upset, then I might think, oh, I wonder why Richard is upset, and
Yeah. So I mean, the way I think it. Tell me if you would agree this is accurate. That it's to bring subjective states, thoughts, and feelings to the level of language.
yes.
Both for one's own subjective states, and then through inquiry, the subjective states of the other person.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yes. And then there's different dimensions of mentalizing, but that kind of gets down into more specifics.
Right, right.
Self, other, thinking, feeling, implicit, explicit. But those are ways to kind of understand. But it's understanding that we have different thoughts, feelings, intentions that are driving our behavior.
Yeah. And I think that that's the ability to do that and to help clients do that is fundamental to effective psychotherapy. Because if you think about it, if you don't bring something to the level of language, then the one great tool you have, which is your consciousness, your capacity to think about things, you can't exercise that. Until you bring something to consciousness, until you bring it to the level of language, you really have no capacity to do anything of it. So if somebody is working through something on a somatic level or acting it out behaviorally, there's really very little they can do to move forward in their lives. So I think mentalization is really, really important.
Yeah.
I wish there was a different word for it, though.
I know, I do too.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
Because
it's very off-putting, I think.
It is off-putting because when it's done right, it's a very deep kind of connection with the other person. It's an emotional process, and yet the word is so cool and technical.
Yeah, I agree.
I've tried to think of a different word for mentalization. I haven't come up with it.
Well, when you do, let me know.
You have that same thing?
I do. I think it's very off-putting, and I always hesitate to talk about it, even with clients, because it's just off-putting, and then it's kind of hard to.
With the clients, I don't have a problem. I just say that to try and bring what you're thinking and feeling to language, so we can share it.
Yeah,
So
and not making assumptions that when you're looking at someone else's behavior, making assumptions about this is why they're doing it, or what they're feeling inside, or what they're thinking, because we don't always know unless they tell us.
Right, right. Yeah, so in class I was talking to the students about an attitude of openness, of receptivity, curiosity, that if you can get into that place, it's a great state to mentalize the other person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think you're a very good mentalizer. I mean, I've seen you good practice at that. I've seen you working with people, and you have that curiosity and interest, and bring them out.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I think that's a great skill. I think, and this is not a humble statement, I think I have that same curiosity. I'm a good
Yes.
mentalizer too.
You
We could have a mentalization competition here, you know, because you could see how many questions you can ask of the person. Let's say we had a third person here, and they said something like, they gave us a little thread to pull, like, I've been having a bad day, let's say, they said that. And I said, okay, Colleen, you go.
Go ahead and
All right.
mentalize, yeah.
What would you say to the person who said, if you wanted to draw them out, to give them an example of how you might use mentalization to draw them out?
How I would use mentalization if they had, yeah.
Or I can do one and
Yeah,
you'll get it.
yeah,
more.
yeah.
I'd say, you know, they say, oh, I'm having a bad day. I said, well, did it start bad? Has it been bad the whole day? Or did it become bad a little bit later? Something like that.
Wow, a bad day? What about it so bad?
Yeah. And then they'll say something else, and you can ask, you know, another question. Do you typically, is this something that happens a lot? Was there something particular that happened today? You know, you could do something like that. And you just keep going. And that's the process of curiosity that draws people out. Yeah. So, so anyway, let's talk a little bit about the family program, you know, at PCH. PCH is an intensive outpatient therapy center. A number of the people who are going to come through here will have some affiliation with PCH, and Colleen is the co-director of their family weekend. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and your involvement there.
Yeah, the family program.
Family program, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's such an important part of the treatment process. So people go in and they get some really intensive help, but then what about their families? Because whenever one person in the family struggles, it affects the whole family. And so we really want to try and shore up and support the family in addition to the person there. And I think it's really good when sometimes the client who's attending kind of sometimes can feel like the identified patient, if you know what I mean, like that they're the ones that are somehow something's wrong. But really, you know, I feel like we all can learn and grow. And so I always come from a very sort of supportive place of, you need your own support too. And so it's not like, okay, well, you need to be fixed as well. I think everybody's afraid of being pathologized and looked at like there's something wrong with them. And so it's really about really trying to provide support for the families. And so we have this intensive family weekend that we throw them into, and it's really quite moving, I find. And I mean, every month I learn something, and I feel like I grow from it. So I feel really humbled to be a part of it. I love doing it.
How long have you done the family program?
About 5 years now. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like I still learn every month. You know.
Yeah. So you have an institutional affiliation, and then you have your dual private practices, right?
Yeah. So I have two offices, one in Orange County and one here in LA, and it's a lot of
Moving
driving.
around, yeah.
Richard and I usually talk with each other when we're on the phone in the car.
Yeah. We identify whether or not we're in our mobile office or our stationary office.
Usually it's mobile.
Mobile, yeah.
It's always, you can always hear the car voices.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So do you like the differences between, do you like having both of those affiliations? Do you like being in a program in a treatment facility and also doing the private practice?
Yeah, I do. I think if I was doing one or the other solely, I think it would be a little hard for me. But it mixes it up and it keeps things fresh for me, you know. And it's kind of it's exciting. It's cool to work at the family program because there's a lot of psycho ed, and we really get people sort of geared up for the work. So there's a lot of support. Plus, we have such a great team, including the illustrious Richard Gilbert. Yes, and so we have a really wonderful team, and it's kind of like, you know, there was dysfunctions growing up in my family, but I feel like this is another family that I feel like we work really well together. We all are in it for the right reasons, and it's really a collaborative environment.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, were there times that you just did private practice, or have you always had some kind of institutional affiliation?
I've worked at other treatment centers, so yes, and a short stint, kind of did some online teaching, but other than that, I did in the beginning work just solely in a private practice, and I found it was, I wouldn't choose that just to do only private practice. I know some people are very happy, you know.
I've never done. I think it would be really isolating and draining to do that.
Yeah,
Plus, you don't grow as much, I don't think, unless you're bouncing things off of people and seeing how they
agree.
Work. Yeah.
And I think because most of my practice is couples and families, so I do so much conferring with other therapists. Like I share so many, I would say a lot, and that's a lot of talking on the phone with other therapists, but it's really complementary. So if you feel like you're working together as a team, you know, to really support the more people that are thinking about this family or this couple, I think the more it's just better. It's like more heads are better than one, you know.
Although if you've ever had a situation where you're collaborating on a family, let's say you're seeing the couple and somebody else is seeing, you know, an individual in the family or something like that, where you're not working together, that you have different conceptions of things. I've had that experience. It's a little difficult.
Yeah, I think I've been lucky that I've had less of. I haven't had much of that, and I don't know. I feel like I kind of skirted by for whatever reason, but I find that it's been largely really positive, and I think there certainly were a couple of times that can happen, and it's sad for the client. It's almost like having, you know, your parents who aren't getting along, and you know, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that we're parents, but it's that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that helpful, but yeah, no, I've been really lucky. I've had and it's good because it gets the creative juices flowing. You know, I know that when we talk, it's like you know, we could go on and on, right?
Right. That's right. So I wanted we're getting close to the end of the interview itself, and then we're going to open it up to some questions from the audience here. But what do you enjoy the most about the work, and what's the most challenging or difficult part of it? Because I think, again, I want to take it back to the contemplation that the students have about possibly pursuing a career in mental health. And I want, having done this for a while, what's the good and the bad of it?
For me, yeah. I think the good is, and I would talk about it from the perspective of working with couples and families, you know, if you're thinking about it from that perspective, is it's so gratifying to help somebody that actually that's going to continue on. So when you're helping a couple or family, when there's healing that goes on and there's positive change that you can foster and then kind of, you know, support, and then they continue on after that, like that to me, like someone being dependent on coming in, and that is not really what I'm after. It's really about, you know, because once they start doing well, I like give it all to them. Like it's like, yes, you did that. Like I really make it clear the risks they took, the turns they took that brought them to that place. And then that they can continue on, like I've gotten, gifts or people calling me or, like afterwards, and
Yeah.
saying we're doing great, or, like we think back on our sessions and think how far we've come. And that's just really, really gratifying.
Yeah.
It's kind of like teaching somebody to fish as opposed to fishing for them.
Right. Planned
Yeah.
obsolescence.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So the impact, and sometimes the enduring impact on people's lives is the
Yeah.
most gratifying part. And the challenge, the greatest challenge, you think, other than the driving?
Yeah, right. I think it's this, I think it's almost like an epidemic now, like this idea, and I can't think of another way to describe it, but when people come in with these really entrenched dispositional attributions of their significant others, and what I mean by that is, I think there's this idea in social psychology about a dispositional as a attribution error, right, as opposed to a situational. And it's like coming in with this foregone conclusion about this other person is bad or, narcissistic or whatever, like labeling this other person, and that is the way they are, they're not going to change, and just kind of loosening that
And
up.
they're there in couples therapy for you to basically change them?
Or change their partner. It's always about, it's always pointing.
Change the partner.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Coming in and this belief like, this person's a terrible person. If they would only change their ways, I'd be happy.
Sure.
And that is a pretty, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. So it's this idea of seeing someone, as a label or a way. And I understand why it got that way, like what could lead someone to feeling that way. So I totally understand, and I've done it myself. So it's not like but I think when that becomes really entrenched and when it can't, there's no flexibility,
Right.
That's hard.
Yeah. I asked Andy Christensen the same question.
Yeah.
And he also said that the hardest part is when he works with couples, not with families, and he said that I just cannot break through, and I just cannot help them.
Yeah.
It's very
It's really
tough.
painful. It
Yeah.
is.
It's painful for everybody, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and I take that, I carry it, like it's you go home and you think about it at night, and it really is
It's hard.
hard.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
All right, well, let's,
We should have reversed that.
what do you mean?
Talked about the challenge first, and
Okay,
then
all right. Well, you want to say a happy one?
it's okay. Maybe one of the questions will bring that out.
I'll add another happy one, which is the level of the impact of hearing all the stories that people tell you in their life. I find it such a privilege, and some of the things that you hear in people's lives are just so incredible. I've never stopped being just amazed at some of the things. Like some people, they don't have particularly, everybody has something that's interesting, but sometimes you just get stopped in your tracks about the things that people have gone through.
Yeah. I was just talking to Megan about why she went into film, or she's thinking about going, or is interested in film. And is it okay if I say that?
Yeah, let's talk about Megan.
It's all about Megan.
It's all about Megan.
And she was saying how it's sort of about, making a story, a story about people's lives and really getting involved in that and engrossed. And I feel like that is what we do. And it is inherently fascinating to me too.
Yeah.
And sometimes jaw-dropping, amazing, some of the things that you hear. And what's also really cool about it is the different walks of life. Like, I've been able to kind of immerse myself in other people's worlds from such disparate, walks of life. It's really interesting, kind of like going on a ride almost, like,
Yeah, exactly. So let's just open it up. Any questions about couples, families, the practice of therapy? All fair game. Sarah, go ahead. Let's see if we can hear you.
Yeah, I can project. Is it common for you to see a drastic change in the couples or family after the first session? And if so, what is it? What do you think it is that makes that particular couple or family like such a quick change?
Well,
Do you want to summarize it just for?
oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Two parts. One is, do you notice when a couple or family come in, if there's a big change in the first session? And if there is a big change, what would you attribute that to? Is that right? Yeah. Well, gosh, that does not happen so often for me. I don't know about you, Richard, but that does not happen very often. I think when in individual work, that is much more so. And I remember Kohut talking about it as the transference clicking into place. And I don't know, I mean, maybe that's some kind of, some part of it. But with couples and families, it's really about, more for me, it's more about kind of getting buy-in to the process. Because I have had people come in with really, like, in a really difficult place. Like, I remember this one mother and adult daughter, and they were they were like, we can't have a relationship. And I think it was like 8 sessions or 6 sessions. So like that kind of turnaround is pretty not as,
Right.
That's more unusual. But so I don't see it that often, I'm sorry to say. I wish I could say yes. What about you, Richard?
I mean, if you think about it this way, let's say somebody comes to see you and they're 25 or 35 years old. So it's taken 25 or 35 years to get to that situation, even though their relationship that they might, if it's couples therapy, it might be a few years or a decade or something like that. But really it's the product of a whole life that is coming to your office. And I once did a calculation that a 50-minute session of psychotherapy is 157th of the time of a week. If you do 7 times 24, whatever that is, someone can do that calculation. But it's something like 101 out of 157th of the week. So to think that something can immediately produce that kind of impact in such a short time, I think it's unrealistic. But I do think that if the best thing you can have, the couple comes in and they make a nice, connection with you, they feel that you can understand them, they feel some sense of connection and competence, that there's a sense of hope and a little bit of optimism. And that might not have been there when they came in the room, and that's a very good byproduct of an initial session. Yes?
Speaking about buy-in, how do you deal with clients, couples who come in and one of them might be dealing with personality disorder, doesn't have the kind of insight to address their own way that they are affecting the couple and the interaction?
Do you want to summarize that?
Yeah, how do you work with a couple where one member, hopefully one member or both members, have what is a personality disorder? I don't know if you even think in those kinds of terms or not.
Well, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to discern that there's a personality disorder at play, because sometimes personality disorder, if substance abuse is involved, that can sometimes mimic a personality disorder. So,
Or trauma.
Trauma, right. So there's a lot of things, it can be difficult to tease out initially. One of the hallmarks, as you probably know, about personality disorders is their long-term entrenched ways of kind of operating. But there's so many different factors that can go into that, and sometimes it's not clear whether it's long-term or not. But I think, so the question is, how do you deal with somebody that has...
Maybe I'll just paraphrase it a little bit. Can you work effectively in a conjoint therapy when one or both members have a personality disorder? Do you need to work individually with a person who might have that extent of a problem and then bring them into couples therapy after they've gained some individual insight and growth?
Yeah.
Some people believe that,
and there's a lot of dissent, I think, in our field about that. I mean, I know Sue Johnson's position historically has been that she doesn't think in terms of personality disorders. But I try and see what kind of leverage I can get in the, so first I have to see, can I impact that person? Are they open to thinking about things in different ways? And usually one of the hallmarks with a personality disorder is this issue of dysregulation. So maybe when the person's at baseline, you can work with them, right? But when they're really upset, everything goes out the window. So I try and look at where can I move? Where do I get some sort of, how can I connect with that person? And then, parlay that into trying to kind of work with the dynamic.
Yeah.
So.
Well, one of the personality disorders, and again, there's controversy in the field as to whether or not we even talk in those terms, but there's one orientation, let's say, one entrenched orientation, which we might call a schizoid orientation, where the person has, deep barriers to being attached. And how would emotionally focused therapy work with that kind of person? Would they need to do some individual work and kind of make a connection with the therapist, which would be much safer, and then sequence that into a more threatening and difficult intimate relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think that from my perspective, it's always valuable when one of the members or both members can get additional individual work, but they're not always up for that. So you can make a suggestion, but they may or may not follow through on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like a scaffolding, right? You're
Right.
basically trying to get some structure in there, and so that you can then work with them a little more effectively.
Yeah. Brett, who's my colleague back there, when he came and talked about the cognitive therapies, DBT and CBT, and we were joking about which, I guess we were invoking personality disorders, were we not? Okay, we were. And he said that he had the most trouble or didn't like working with people who had a narcissistic orientation. And I said I had no problem with that. And I had the most problem with more of a schizoid, shut down kind of person. Because at least the narcissistic person, if you're not concerned about them like devaluing you all the time, which doesn't bother me. But, and there's energy. There's at least energy there to work with. And I think psychology has a better track record at modulating and reshaping energy. But when you get somebody who's so shut down, so withdrawn, has so little internal process and awareness, I find that an excruciating process, like searching for water in the desert. So.
But I mean, if you think about it, like it'd have to be so individual for me. Like when talking about in general terms, it feels sort of, and of course I understand that you're thinking about it in a broad term, but it's very kind of label driven. So we're not talking about a person. And I think at the end of the day, I think one of the things that really guides how I work is I always remember there's a person in there, no matter what's going on. And if I can't connect to that person, then something's I gotta figure that out.
Yeah.
And so often, like, I'll start out working with someone and it can feel difficult, and then I just love the person after. I mean, I really care about them and they matter to me, but I have to get to know them. So talking about like someone like in a type or something, it's very hard for me because it's so about connecting with.
Have there been people who you couldn't connect with? Or is that a rarity?
I'm sure there are. Nothing's coming to mind, but I'm sure there has been. Yes. And I always feel like I failed. So
That there should have been a way in.
Yeah, there should have been a way in, right.
Right.
But I also know that, not everybody can work with everybody, and so some people just might not like working with me, or I might bug them or something, So that's fair.
Right. Okay, yeah, Teo?
In terms of family therapy, who do you find that is, like, who suggests the therapy, and also how does it work if it's, like, let's say mother, father, 2 kids, and they all have communication issues with all of each other? How does that work exactly?
It's a great question.
Sounds
Yeah.
like the family program.
Yeah. There's a definite process to that.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So,
Do you want to just repeat the question?
Oh,
just
yes,
for
thank you.
Yeah.
So, who usually drives initiating the therapy? Is it mom, dad, siblings? Not usually. And then, depending on who drives it, what if there's multiple issues going on in the family? How do you decide who to work with? Yeah? So, I find that usually the parents drive wanting therapy, and because I think just as a parent, it's distressing when you have trouble with your kids, and I think kids, because they're naturally trying to individuate and have their own identities and stuff, they're not usually as bothered. Although we do see a fair amount of clients at PCH that are adult children that really do want to do the works, but I would say more often than not, it's the parents. And then who do you work with first? That's a whole assessment process of seeing where the most distress is in the family. So typically I'll see each member of the family individually. Sometimes I can get a sense on the phone from just talking with them what's going on, and I have a general sense of how to start. But sometimes if there's a lot of explosiveness or contention involved, then I'll want to see them each individually and get a sense.
We talked about this last week, because I think this issue comes up with any systems-oriented therapist. When you break up the system and see the individuals, does the system hold privilege, or does the individual hold privilege when you see them? Will you hold the secret?
That's a really good. You meaning, what do you mean hold?
Let's say, for example, there's a couple and one member of one of the parents is having an affair, and you learn that in an individual session. Would you disclose that? Now, of course, if a child, disclosed physical abuse, you'd be mandated to do that.
Right.
But you're not mandated to, report a marital betrayal. But now you have that information.
Yeah, I mean,
Has that happened? You've ever had that?
Yeah, I've had that happen, and I don't have a hard and fast rule. I know that some therapists do have hard and fast rules, and I don't, because I always want to see what the situation is. There's so many nuances involved, and but I always do try, of course, to support the person in bringing that forward, because otherwise we're not going to be able to do any work.
Right.
So, yeah. But in terms of the question about the family, it's really looking at where is the most distress in the system. And then working there. I don't find that it's usually a great idea when there's a lot of different conflicting issues going on to see the whole family together individually. So if there's 4 members, I'd maybe see a dyad. And so where is the most distress? Let's go there and start to work on that. And then kind of move from there slowly.
Yeah, so it's a good question, because how to format when you have an individual, you just see the individual, but even with a couple, does one person need individual therapy? Do they both come in as a couple? There are complicated aspects of entry and formatting whenever you deal with the system. Yeah. We have a lot of questions. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Do you think as a therapist it helps or is better if you are a parent doing family therapy, or does it not matter as much?
That's a good question. How many parents do we have? Not many. So, yeah, I think it's a good question. Wow, oh, so the question, we should repeat it,
Yes,
right?
please,
The-
yeah.
The question is, do you think it matters if you're a parent or not when you're working with a family, or you're doing couple therapy, or you're working with a family system? Do you think it matters? Does it help or not help, or does it matter? I don't know. I can't really answer for other people because I have met really good therapists that were parents and that weren't parents. So I think that I think you can be effective whether or not you're a parent, for sure. I think that for myself, there are things that I didn't really understand until I became a parent. So it really helps me to empathize and understand the parent point of view and also the child point of
Just
view.
to clarify this, when you said you've seen really good therapists who are not parents, are you referring to their general skills or in family therapy? That a non-parent
in-
doing family
Mhm,
therapy?
in family therapy, yeah. I've seen
Yeah.
some really, really just, talented, intuitive, just really good at it. Yeah, I have.
Wow, that's surprising, because we had a portion of the class very early on when we were talking about multicultural counseling. We raised this issue about whether like has to help like. Remember we were talking about that? Okay, and I sort of had the position that it's almost maybe easier to bridge like class divides or racial divides or something, and that maybe the hardest divide is between people who have children and don't have children in their understanding about families. I feel in my own experience that being a parent was absolutely critical in terms of improving my work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't start until I was a parent, so, but yeah, I agree.
And
I mean,
especially, studying attachment theory and object relations, early experience, it all was really derivative of the experiences with children.
yeah.
Yeah,
It was.
to
It's
learn that.
very important component for me individually, yeah.
Yeah. Hillary?
Since we're talking about parents, I was just wondering, since parents really have the pressure of setting the foundation of the family and they have the ability to change that foundation, what things or what decisions and behaviors do parents do that you find are really great, really help build a great foundation even without therapy, to really just help the family move forward in a positive way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just in terms of being a parent, you're asking what do I see as certain kind of ways of being or operating as a parent that really help create a stable or secure or, well-developed, well-adjusted child.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I have this kind of little this sheet that I have the clients fill out every family weekend, and I have these questions on there, and it's kind of like what goes wrong and what upsets them, and then kind of what is their biggest fear. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Of course you do. You do the breakout. And so I've heard this over and over, and I don't know if it's because of the population we're looking at or not, because we're at a treatment center, but over and over and over, and I don't know how this resonates with any of you out there, I hear, I really want to be understood. I really want them to see me and understand me. And I think that when your kids are young, you can have so much impact on them. They look up to you, you know what I mean? You can really shape them. And then as they start to get older and they start to individuate and become their own persons, you lose some of that impact, and you can feel like not very effective as a parent. And the parents who want to grab onto trying to save their kid or help their kid or influence their kid, I feel like sometimes that can go awry. And I think the parents that really try and listen and understand their kid and see things through their eyes, I think that really goes such a long way. So that's one thing that I could name.
Yeah, that's the mentalization part. There's that M word again. But But yeah, I mean, that's in original development, that capacity for attunement, emotional attunement and accurate empathy is the key to an attachment. I don't think that ever really changes.
Yeah.
You know, you have your best shot when they're young. There's a critical period. They're not fighting you at all. But I think you have to get back to that we say music, that bass chord.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
That's the bass chord of all of it. Erin?
Yeah, so continuing on with the parenting thing, do people ever expecting parents ever come to you, and or parents with a really young baby coming to you kind of for direction, and not we're currently experiencing a problem in our family, but I don't know where to start. How can I start fostering a really well-adjusted child?
I wish I had more of those.
Really?
That's
That sounds awesome.
I
That
know,
sounds
I know.
great.
Could you send a few my way?
Yeah.
That
It would be great if people did that.
I know,
mean,
it really would be. I usually see them when things have been going wrong for a while, and
Yeah.
there's some really difficult issues. And often I get, can you fix him or her? Can you fix this person?
Right.
And that's hard. That I have to, kind of shift that paradigm. That's what, because that Einstein quote, what is it, that we can't solve the problems with the same thinking that created them?
Right.
It doesn't quite work.
But yeah,
I just want to say I do have some clients that are really, really well adjusted, and I've had the privilege of working in some family systems where I've seen an 80-year-old grandma and parents and teenagers, and some people really get to really utilize what you have to offer. They really soak it up. You can see, I had a 80-year-old client in my office today, and she's got her notepad out, and she's I learn a lot from her, and she's just sitting there okay, let me write that down. It's really a pleasure.
you just mentioned the grandparent. I think that's a kind of early intervention that occurs on a natural basis, but families are so dispersed and they are isolated for the most part, so that the parents really are sometimes just going by instinct, and they don't have any guidance or correction. I guess there are books that they could read or something, but it would be wonderful if young parents, the newborns and things like that, could get an intervention, a preventative intervention. I think we'd be all better off. But usually it awaits until there's a problem.
Because you don't know that something's wrong until it's broke, right? Until it's not working. You think, okay, well, I learned this. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, and when I was doing I started out in child therapy, doing child therapy, and a lot of times the critical time was when the child went to school, either preschool or elementary school, and the product got evaluated by people outside of the system, and that's oftentimes where the therapy began. It didn't begin, unless there's something really extreme, like a spectrum disorder or a severe attachment disorder or something almost neurologically based. But in terms of emotional issues and behavioral issues, it's usually when the product hits the road, and people can observe and they tell you something's wrong here. So, I wish, Erin, yeah. Go ahead.
Coming from a music background or the creative background, have you found that the arts and kind of your upbringing with that has influenced your therapy in any way, or whether it's conscious or this is so part of you that just naturally comes out, or if it's in your self-regulation with dealing with the heaviness that can be there sometimes.
Yeah. So how much does my interest in arts and so forth influence my work, and does it inform it, and do I utilize it for any kind of outlet, or, you know. Well, I love creativity, and so one of the things I love about collaborating is to think about things creatively. So, and I think about it in terms of energy. So it's like if somebody comes in, I'm always looking at like kind of what is the energy, you know, is somebody, you know, and kind of reading the room and getting a sense of sort of the rhythm of what's going on. And I love being able to shape that and influence it. And so I really, that goes a long way. What's really interesting is people will come in, and sometimes I know they have a music background, or somebody's like, I've seen someone that's in the symphony, you know, like they'll have, and they don't know anything about me. They just think I'm a therapist, right? And so I have this whole other life that I lived, you know what I mean, that I did all these other things, and they don't know anything about it, and I don't bring it up.
Yeah.
So do you bring it up? Do you bring up your?
No. I have people come up to me and say, "Did you do?" And I go, "Yeah," you know. But I don't talk about it.
I don't either. And
Yeah.
so there's a sort of assumption. And so it's interesting to kind of hear them talk about it, like you think that I don't know anything about that, you know. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting.
Well, the interesting thing is, I mean, Brett, you were telling me, weren't you an English major first? Yeah, and really I see myself less as a musician than a writer,
Yeah.
you know,
yeah.
and so we both come from a sort of literary background, and I feel that when I work with people, if I see them in almost a literary sensibility, like the story of a life is a great story, and it helps me connect with them when I see it in sort of the same sensibility as a writer, from
Yeah.
a narrative, literary point of view.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's,
All right, we have one last question, then we'll stop. Anybody? Last one? All right, go ahead, Sarah.
You did. This is kind of off. I'm not.
You want to know what happens in the second session now?
Do you see any prominent problems that arise from divorced parents, and like, do you see step parents come into therapy with you as well?
oh yeah. Yeah. I see a lot of blended families. Yes. Yeah. So the question is, do I see a lot of divorced families or step families, and what tends to be the issues?
The major issues.
Yeah.
Do you see any like common issues or?
Well, I think that the biggest issue that I see that creates the most difficulty and distress for the kids is when the parents are in conflict. When the parents are in conflict, I think this is something that's a really important way to think about family therapy, is like whenever the parents are in conflict, it's like the two sides of the kid are in conflict. And I think that creates such a foundational distress in the child. And I don't think that separation or divorce has to be so bad. I'm not saying that it's not distressing or difficult, but that it's really about how the parents handle it. So, I mean, I've had people come in that are just really, I'm working with them not to get back together, but to be able to be civil with each other and be in the same room and be able to collaborate as parents, because I think that has such a huge impact on the kids.
Right.
Profound.
All right, well, thank you very much it was a
Yeah.
great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
It's a
Yeah.
pleasure.